Hello everyone. Today I'd like to talk about something that's been bothering me for a while. It's a particular contradiction, one that comes up over and over whenever trans people or trans issues are mentioned either online or in the press by people who self-describe as gender critical. And I think I should start today by showing you an example of that contradiction. So, in June of 2020, author J.K. Rowling published a statement on her website titled J.K. Rowling Writes About Her Reasons for Speaking Out on Sex and Gender Issues. And in that statement, Rowling explains why she decided to throw her weight behind the gender-critical crowd. There's been a lot written and spoken about this statement, but I want to focus on one particular part of it right now, and that is J.K. Rowling's description of Magdalen Burns. Magdalen Burns was a British YouTuber who Rowling describes as an immensely brave young feminist who was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises. And because of this, she says, when Rowling followed Burns on Twitter, she was subjected to abuse from trans activists. Rowling also talks several times about her concerns in her piece. She doesn't want to be, quote, slurred as a bigot for having concerns about single-sex spaces, for instance, and she ends her piece with a request for empathy for the women whose, quote, sole crime is wanting their concerns to be heard without receiving threats and abuse. So, this is the framing. Magdalen Burns and women like her simply believe in the importance of biological sex. They just want their concerns to be heard and they don't want to be called bigots because of that. And just because of those things, they and their supporters are bombarded with unwarranted social media abuse. Now, even if we're trying to be as fair and objective as we can be here, it has to be said that this framing looks rather one-sided, right? All the aggression and abuse is coming from just the one side in Rowling's view. We are all meek angels with just a few concerns, but we're getting shouted down by completely unreasonable social media abusers, you know. So let's examine this framing. Is how J.K. Rowling described Magdalen Burns accurate? What was she actually like? Well, I imagine many of you will be familiar with her now infamous blackface tweet, where she calls trans women, quote, fucking blackface actors who are motivated by sick sexual perversions. You see, Magdalen Burns was not passively voicing concerns. She wasn't simply stating her opinion that biological sex is important. She spent her time attacking transgender identities, which she repeatedly declared were invalid. In her YouTube videos, she consistently made a point of misgendering any trans person she mentioned, and she was also more than willing to attempt to ally herself and her cause with figures on the far right. She could be seen on Twitter sharing Breitbart news stories about then neo-Nazi poster boy Milo Yiannopoulos, praising him and asking for him to share her YouTube videos. She even defended Yiannopoulos after he was widely criticised as a result of condoning, in a podcast, child molestation. As a side note here, Burns has also called what she considers trans activism to be a, quote, child safety issue, which is utterly ludicrous when considered in contrast to her defense of a white nationalist who said child sexual abuse could be a, quote, hugely positive experience. That is what he said. Burns could also be seen giving a platform to the controversial figure Posey Parker, who we'll talk more about in a moment. She also had a habit of focusing on George Soros as the person who she claimed was funding the EU transgender lobby, which is a little suspect, especially considered in light of her willingness to pal around with racists. So what's my point here? Well, there's a huge contradiction between the Magdalen Burns described by J.K. Rowling and the Magdalen Burns who actually existed. I myself interacted with Magdalen several times on Twitter, and this is just my subjective view, but she was consistently aggressive and unreasonable, and someone who I thought was motivated not by some concerns she had about single-sex spaces or a desire to protect her rights, but by her hatred and disgust of trans people. You can't call people pathetic, sick, fuck, pervert, blackface actors and then say, oh sorry, I just believe in the importance of biological sex, I just have a few concerns. So where does this leave us with regards to J.K. Rowling and how she chose to portray Burns? Well, it would be premature to come to any conclusions right now, I think. After all, Magdalen Burns is only one person, so if we want to build a proper argument here, we need some more evidence, I think. So let's pick back up with Posey Parker. So Parker, also known as Kelly J. Keane Minchell, is someone who thinks that, quote, women who call themselves men should be sterilised, so that's the sort of person she is. Parker is a controversial figure even within the gender-critical movement, and something that happened very recently serves as a good example of why that is. On Sunday, September 18th of this year, Parker organised an event called Let Women Speak, which took place in Brighton. It featured gender-critical speakers talking about what they see as the dangers of what they call trans ideology, and it also attracted a crowd of counter-protesters who turned up to protest the event. But the event also attracted some other people, and these were far-right nationalists, such as the Tommy Robinson-linked Hearts of Oak group who streamed the event live on the internet. Posie Parker has defended including these groups as part of her events. She sees the issue of stopping so-called trans ideology as so important that she's willing to welcome in anyone who agrees with her on that particular issue, even if they also happen to be racist, homophobic, misogynist, or outright fascist. Parker is friendly with white supremacist YouTubers, she's appeared on Tucker Carlson, and she herself has a history of making racist statements that again is controversial even within the gender-critical movement. Some gender-critical people refuse to associate with her, and the group Women's Place UK put out a statement explaining why they were cutting all links with Parker, saying, quote, "Women's liberation cannot be won by aligning with reactionary or oppressive groups or individuals who would deny women our rights and increase division and injustice." Another person upset about the far-right infiltration of the gender-critical movement is Angela Wilde, member of the group Get the L Out, who viewers of my other videos will definitely remember. This is her alongside Rowling at a much publicised lunch in a photograph featuring many of the other prominent figures of the UK's anti-trans movement. Wilde recently stated on Twitter, "I'm horrified. We seem to have handed over our movement to people who go around preaching racist and misogynistic hatred. There was a time it was shameful to be a racist. Nowadays we can't even name racism anymore, let alone denounce racist infiltration." It's one thing about being called far-right by the TRAs, that's what she calls trans rights activists, and laugh it off, because frankly I'd rather cut both my legs off, I guess, than accept Heritage Foundation money, an alliance with Matt Walsh, or proclaim proudly that on the issues, Trump is my man. But when the far right speaks at gender-critical events unchallenged, we have no leg to stand on to tell them that's not true, because hey, it is true. Well, not in my name. On the other hand, there are many prominent people within the anti-trans movement who are supporting Parker, even despite her history of racism and her openness to working with the far right. Returning to this image, we can see both Maya Forstater and Helen Joyce standing on either side of Rowling there. They both attended Posie Parker's event. This is them travelling to the event. This is Helen Joyce at the event holding a cut-up pride flag. She's not gay herself, by the way. And this is both Helen and Maya speaking at the event in clips uploaded by Hearts of Oak to their Twitter account, Hearts of Oak UK. So this event exposed something of a schism in the anti-trans movement. Some of them are happy to work with people like Posie Parker and the far-right groups that she welcomes to her events, and some of them are not. And there was much discussion on the issue in the wake of this event. J.K. Rowling chose to weigh in by using her platform to condemn the protesters at the event. Not the far-right presence inside the event, but the people who were there to protest the event. Rowling's language is also offensive and absurd and incorrect. The protesters were howling at lesbians for not doing dick, apparently. She also explains in the replies to her tweet that, quote, "Women unafraid and unashamed of saying that they love only women are the greatest affront to patriarchy." But J.K. Rowling seems to be a bit confused here, to be charitable. This was not a lesbian event. The organiser, Posie Parker, is married to a man. Speaker Maya Forstater is married to a man. Speaker Helen Joyce is married to a man. By their own definition of lesbian, they are certainly not lesbians, and I doubt the men from the far-right groups present at the event identify as lesbians, to make a minor assumption there. There were some lesbians at the event, I'm sure, but there were also a bunch of straight, conservative homophobes. Posie Parker herself has argued that the, quote, LGBTQ community is attempting to indoctrinate and groom children in a video titled, "Thank You, Marjorie Taylor Greene." Something else that needs to be mentioned here is Parker's association with an American group called Hands Across the Aisle, an organisation that claims to want to unite radical feminists with conservative Christians in order to oppose what they call gender identity ideology. Hands Across the Aisle was founded by Kaylee Triller and Emily Zinos, both of whom oppose gay rights and campaign to outlaw abortion. Zinnos attends anti-abortion rallies, as seen here, and Triller writes anti-abortion articles like this one titled "Women Won't Be Liberated Until We're Free from Abortion," posted on the website The Federalist. Hands Across the Aisle claims Posie Parker as a member. Here she is meeting founder Emily Zinnos, and the group have posted fundraising campaigns in support of Parker on both their Facebook page and their website. So Parker is associated with and has taken money from conservative anti-abortion campaigners in the US. And this is something I want to highlight in particular here, because of course the argument that the anti-trans crowd always use to defend their positions is that they're acting in defense of women's rights. They aren't attacking trans people, they're simply defending the rights that feminism has won for women, they say. But what does it mean for that claim when the person making it is working with and is funded by conservative anti-abortion groups? On a similar note, one of the speakers at the event I showed there was Maya Forstater. Here's another picture of her getting all chummy with Rowling there. And she says, "J.K. Rowling has been such a source of strength to me and to so many women standing up for women's rights." So that's what Forstater is doing in her own words, standing up for women's rights. I mention this because Forstater is due to speak at another event very soon, that being Lawfare, the use and abuse of law to fight for freedom. That's an event being put on as part of the Battle of Ideas Festival by the group Adf Uk. So who are Adf Uk? Well, they're the UK branch of the US-based Alliance Defending Freedom. And to quote the Southern Poverty Law Centre, founded by some 30 leaders of the Christian right, the Alliance Defending Freedom is a legal advocacy and training group that supported the recriminalization of sexual acts between consenting LGBTQ adults in the US and criminalization abroad, has defended state-sanctioned sterilization of trans people abroad, has contended that LGBTQ people are more likely to engage in paedophilia, and claims that a homosexual agenda will destroy Christianity and society. The ADF also campaigns to outlaw abortion. Their website proclaims the overturning of Roe v. Wade as a victory, and is generally just covered in anti-abortion rubbish. The first president of the ADF was a man called Alan Sears, who wrote a book called The Homosexual Agenda, The Principal Threat to Religious Freedom Today. The second president of the ADF was attorney and Baptist minister Michael Farris, who in 2003 wrote a legal brief arguing against the Supreme Court overturning sodomy laws in the Lawrence v. Texas decision. So what is Maya Forstater doing speaking at an ADF event? She claims to be standing up for women's rights, but she's working with people who campaign to take those rights away. They want to take away a woman's right to have an abortion. If she's a lesbian, they want to take away her right to get married to anyone except a man. And if she has sex with another woman, they want to send her to prison. Anyway, what about the other speaker at Posie Parker's event, Helen Joyce? Is she merely standing up for women's rights? Well, another person at the event was another Helen Staniland. Now, Staniland hosts an online show called Wine with Women. That's wine spelled without an H there. And a few months ago she had Helen Joyce on as a guest. Now this interview caused quite a bit of alarm, and rightly so. In it, Joyce openly talks about wanting to reduce the number of trans people. All trans people, even if they are happily transitioned, she says, are a problem for the world, because they need what she calls special accommodations. Every trans person is a difficulty, she says. I watched this whole interview and it was utterly horrible and very revealing. The clarification that she wants to reduce the number of people who transition, even if they are happily transitioned, is especially awful, and the talk about trans people being, quote, difficulties who are problems for the world because they need special accommodations just sounds like fascist eugenics rhetoric. The first thing that came to mind for me listening to this interview were those Nazi Party propaganda films about disabled people that I watched as part of making my video on the bell curve. They too talked about groups of people as costly problems burdening the rest of society. This interview again put light to the claim that Joyce and her allies just have some concerns or just want to protect women's rights. This is her on the offensive, talking about keeping down the number of trans people like they're some invasive pest or something. Moving on, let's talk about Alison Bailey, who's standing between Joyce and Forstater in the picture there. Bailey is someone who has also defended joining forces with bigots, and I quote, "To be clear, every woman and girl must know that their sex-based rights will disappear if they do not pay attention and join this struggle. This is so regardless of their skin colour, age, economic status, politics, education, etc., whether they are non-racist, racist, homosexual, or homophobic. This is a danger and a struggle the likes of which none of us has ever known. Adhering to any given political or philosophical belief system is not the immediate priority. If I'm being attacked and someone's willing to come to my rescue, I'm not going to ask about their politics before welcoming their help. Don't worry though, she doesn't personally condone bigotry. She actually abhors it, she says, but just not enough to not welcome the help of racists and homophobes in her movement. Alison Bailey is one of the founders of the anti-trans group LGB Alliance. Now, another founder of LGB Alliance is Bev Jackson, who has defended working with the US-based right-wing think tank, the Heritage Foundation. I've mentioned the Heritage Foundation before in another video of mine because they were anti-sex education. The Heritage Foundation are the worst. They're climate change deniers, they oppose gay marriage, they work to scale back voting rights, they campaigned to overturn Roe vs. Wade, but Bev Jackson is open to working with them. And speaking of the Heritage Foundation, let's give a mention to Julie Bindle, the person on the lower right of the picture there. Julie Bindle is a journalist who frequently works with Heritage Foundation speaker Jennifer Lal. There's Lal talking on a Heritage Foundation panel there. Here she is on another panel. Here she is doing a talk with Julie Bindle. Another talk with Julie Bindle. Here's a picture of them just hanging out. So it's safe to say that Julie Bindle is pretty obviously open to working with Heritage Foundation speakers. So that's a +1 to open to working with anti-abortion groups there. And before we move on, I should point out one of Jennifer Lal's fellow Heritage Foundation speakers, Gary Powell, seated next to her there. And just to bring things full circle here, Gary Powell used to work with the LGB Alliance. He was on their online comms team and responsible for updating their social media feeds. All this makes me wonder about the people who earnestly believe in the LGB Alliance. You know, the people who take it at face value and trust that it's an organisation that exists to defend gay rights. Do they ever think, for an organisation that exists to support gay rights, the LGB Alliance sure seems friendly with people who work with the Heritage Foundation, an organisation that opposes gay rights? That's strange, isn't it? It's a little suspect there. Not really what you'd expect. Anyway, next up, let's talk about Carolyn Farrow. Now, Pharaoh is someone who earlier this year tweeted out how she was feeling emotional because her life has been, quote, invaded by insane trans rights activists. Then she says she saw J.K. Rowling coming out fighting and she lost it, to which Rowling replied, "Big love to you, kiss, kiss, kiss." What a lovely moment there. So who is Carolyn Farrow, the person to whom Rowling is sending love and kisses? Well, Carolyn Farrow is the director of the UK branch of the organisation Citizen Go. So, who are Citizen Go? Now, if you've been paying attention to the rest of the video today, I doubt this revelation will be all that shocking to you, but Citizen Go are a far-right, anti-abortion, anti-gay rights organisation. This one originated in Spain, and not the US though, so that's a novelty at least. Citizen Go have defended Russia's laws pertaining to so-called gay propaganda. They've campaigned against abortion in Kenya, where they astroturfed the debates online. They paid Kenyan people to tweet health disinformation and anti-abortion arguments. Pharaoh herself has written anti-abortion articles. She's tweeted that homosexual acts are sinful. Here she is campaigning against a pride parade. You get the picture. Pharaoh is also notorious in Ireland for downplaying the Catholic Church's infant mass grave scandal. And as a side note here, Pharaoh is currently running a crowdfunder for her own legal fees through the Citizen Go site. There are people who call themselves feminists donating money to this organisation. So I want to talk about something in particular in relation to Pharaoh, and that is platform responsibility. Let's imagine a possibility. Maybe J.K. Rowling didn't know who Carolyn Farrow was, she just saw someone praising her on Twitter and responded in kind, inadvertently supporting an anti-abortion homophobe in front of her millions of followers. Now that is lazy and irresponsible, but possible, maybe. But here's the thing, following her tweet, hundreds of people immediately pointed out to Rowling who Pharaoh is, providing every sort of evidence you could ask for. It made the news, this tweet. Forbes talked about this tweet. So she knows now, doesn't she? But this tweet is still up. Rowling didn't delete this even after being told who Pharaoh was and the sorts of things that Citizen Go are up to. Now, unfortunately, this is a pattern. As another example, Rowling has praised the anti-trans work of self-described theocratic fascist Matt Walsh, a man who is currently in hot water after an audio recording surfaced of him seeming totally cool with adult men impregnating minors so long as they also get married to them. Matt Walsh has also spoken in favour of arranged marriages. But even after a flood of complaints about her praise for a creepy fascist, J.K. Rowling's tweet in support of his work remains online. Just a couple more examples. Rowling sent a nice reply to the account Literary Goon, someone who had previously threatened to set those who believe in gender ideology on fire, urinate on them, kill them, and bury them in the desert. Lots of people informed Rowling about that, but her reply to him remains. Dennis Kavanagh, writing on the account Jebadoo2, was suspended from Twitter for saying that he preferred AIDS to the work of charities like Stonewall and Mermaids. When he returned to Twitter, J.K. Rowling was there to welcome him back, even though she was told why he was suspended, and he himself claimed to, quote, stand by every word in her Twitter replies. He was later suspended again for threatening those charities and their friends, saying he would, quote, fucking nail you to a wall. Rowling was also told about this, of course, but again ignored it. And we can't say that she doesn't see these replies, because when people point these things out to her, she blocks them. She blocked me for criticising her in her Twitter replies, so she is aware of all this, but ignores it, because she has to. She wants to pretend that all social media abuse, all the death threats, all the violent fantasies about setting people on fire and cutting them up and nailing them to things, she wants to pretend that all that is solely originating from people critical of her and her allies. And in order to preserve that fantasy, she must deliberately overlook the abuse originating from inside her own camp. She just quietly pretends not to notice it and blocks anyone who points it out to her. The last person I want to talk about today is not one of J.K. Rowling's new friends, but one of her old friends, Baroness Emma Nicholson. Rowling co-founded the Children's High Level Group charity with Nicholson way back in 2005, but still jokes around with her making fun of trans people on Twitter. Emma Nicholson is a homophobic conservative politician who opposed same-sex marriage, opposed lesbians being parents, supported Section 28, and she's proposed legislation to limit access to abortion. As recently as 2 years ago, Nicholson could be seen arguing against same-sex marriage, which saw her receiving much criticism as well as being removed from her position with the Booker Prize Foundation. Nicholson has also in the past had her house protested by a lesbian activist group. Nicholson has also attended and given speeches at Posey Parker's events, at one of which at least she stated her intention to get Posey Parker into Parliament. Emma Nicholson is a typical example of a bigot who's found that homophobia simply doesn't have the same level of open institutional support that it once had, and so now uses transphobia as a way to advance her bigotry. And I want to make something very clear here. Emma Nicholson is a politician voting on and proposing actual laws. She isn't your nan, who just doesn't know all the PC words or whatever. She has actual power that she has wielded to attempt to stop same-sex marriage and roll back abortion rights. And she's been welcomed into the gender-critical so-called feminist movement just because she's willing to be transphobic. With this in mind, I want to think about J.K. Rowling's claim that she supports abortion and gay marriage. Twitter user Katie Montgomery prompted Rowling earlier this year to say that she has always supported abortion and gay marriage. But I wonder what that means in light of everything that we've talked about today. What does it mean to support abortion rights and gay marriage if you also support people who are working to outlaw those things? If you're friends with politicians who introduce anti-abortion bills? Several groups we've talked about today actively campaign to take away abortion rights and gay marriage rights, and many people that J.K. Rowling supports either work for those groups directly or are open to working with them as part of an anti-trans movement. The transphobes are so desperate for allies in their crusade against trans people that some of them are willing to join up with groups who, if they got their way, would force all women back into the kitchen and all gay women back into a closet in that kitchen. The anti-trans movement claim to only be protecting their rights, but these are the very same rights that they're willing to risk by allying themselves with far-right reactionary movements that seek to take those rights away. This alliance threatens women's rights far more than anything trans people are accused of doing, and it seems obvious to say this, but it reveals that this movement is not really about protecting women's rights, but can only be about attacking trans rights. Unfortunately, the divide in the anti-trans movement between those open to working with conservatives and the far right and those who are not is being won by the people who are willing to do so. The people not willing to align themselves with racists, homophobes and misogynists are being sidelined, and the ones who are being left to run the ship. And this is who J.K. Rowling surrounds herself with. Literally surrounds herself with. Rowling herself has very recently shown where she stands on the issue. She posted a picture of herself in a shirt criticising Nicola Sturgeon for being a, quote, destroyer of women's rights. Now this shirt is a design from Posey Parker's online store, which can be seen advertising the shirts under Rowling's tweet. Posey Parker, remember, throws rallies that fascist groups are openly welcome to attend. She works with and is funded by an anti-abortion organisation. She thinks, quote, women who call themselves men should be sterilised. And J.K. Rowling is helping to advertise her t-shirts. So what's my point today? Is it that J.K. Rowling is a bad person? Well, not really, although she is. My point today was to show the worrying links between the UK's anti-trans movement and far-right groups. J.K. Rowling just happens to be right in the middle of all this. If I had to make a concluding point about Rowling, it would be that she knows what she's doing. I think we've seen enough evidence today to fairly make that judgment. When she shows kindness towards ultra-conservative bigots, she knows exactly what she's doing. When she attacks and mischaracterizes the people who protest those ultra-conservative bigots, she knows exactly what she's doing. She is a long-time friend of ultra-conservative bigots, after all. That's just who she is. And everything she says about respecting trans people and marching with them if they were discriminated against or whatever else is just a lie. She's just a liar. The contradiction I mentioned at the start of the video isn't really a contradiction at all. It's just a conscious misrepresentation of the anti-trans movement. And I'd like to end today by thinking again about Angela Wilde, the person who said she was horrified about the gender-critical movement being handed over to the far right. And I'd like to have a brief word with anyone who has thus far supported the anti-trans movement, but now, like Angela, has some concerns about all the racists and homophobes turning up. So, hello. Whatever you think trans people are up to, it has to be said that objectively, it is some small beans compared to the outlawing of abortion and the recriminalization of gay sex. Now, I'm not speaking for anyone but myself here, but trans people are not your enemies, trust me. But the Heritage Foundation, Citizen Go, the ADF, Hands Across the Aisle and groups like them, they are actually coming for your rights. They have people working around the clock trying to undo the last century of feminism. Are you content to be used by them? Especially if you're not straight yourself, you're going to be relegated to being the gay camouflage for a bunch of straight conservative homophobes who work with the US religious right. Do you really think that they'd stop after pushing just trans people back in the closet? Of course they wouldn't. The moment you're done helping them push trans people in, you'll feel the hands on your back, believe me. So, you know, get out now. That's my advice. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, everyone. And thank you especially to all my supporters over on Patreon, some of whom are scrolling by right now. Patreon backers get early access to all my videos, so if that's something you feel like checking out, I'll leave the link below in the video description. You can also follow me on Twitter and Twitch if you like. I will leave those links below as well. So, thanks a lot for watching today, folks. I'll see you next time.